help with this reunion this year for our 1958 graduating class, 65 years ago. I thought, my goodness, how perfect to have Dr. Saxton speak to us, because we are women of a certain age. We are. So I called the college for help, and this very talkative, super friendly woman answered the phone. I thought it would be difficult. It was not. She told me all kinds of things. I told her my situation, and she said, oh, well, Dr. Kirsten Saxton is a professor here. Would you like to be in touch with her? Oh, yes, I would. And so she put me in touch with Dr. Kirsten Saxton. I emailed Kirsten. She emailed me back her mother's contact. I emailed her mother, and her mother answered. And she said, I would love to speak to all of you. So I was just so pleased to have that happen in such a positive, friendly, and quick way. It wasn't, oh, well, maybe I will, maybe I will. No, I'd love to do it. So that was a bonus for me. So Dr. Saxton can tell you all about her book, but I can tell you that she has the clearest and most uncluttered prose, and it's wonderful to read. There's no problem getting into the heads of these fictional elderly women that she writes about in her book. And I always look forward to my read. I've always wondered, who am I going to read tonight? I don't know. So her commentaries are insightful. She has commentaries on society and how they treat elderly women, how maybe we think about elderly women, and how we need to change and society needs to change so that elderly women feel that they are as much a contributing factor as anybody else. So a little bio. Dr. Saxton earned her Mills M.A. in 1972. She subsequently became a Mills Professor of English, and then she was the first Dean of Letters. She co-founded the Women's Studies program and founded the Rhetoric and Composition program. That sounds good. She is the author of scholarly works, especially Virginia Woolf and others, I'm sure. So I did mostly read about that. She has been Professor Emerita since 2016. So the two Drs. Saxton are here tonight. They are joining us this evening, and please help me welcome them.
Oh, they just get to hear why, even though I came after her, I was here first. Shouldn't like this.
Does this work?
Can you speak louder?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have always avoided mics, but as I've gotten older, I've realized that I need to use them. So I don't want to blast you out of the room. Thank you for that incredibly gracious introduction. That is the loveliest one I've ever had.
Thank you.
So I am going to read from a script, because otherwise I'll never get through on time, because I'll keep going on digressions. But my vision's a little weird, and so bear with me. Okay, here I go.
Tell me if we need to look at that.
Thank you all for being here. I am delighted to get to share the evening with fellow alums, or sister alums, I guess I should say. I am going to talk about stories, my own and those that shape our understanding of ourselves. As a girl, I felt as if I personally knew the characters in my favorite novels. Growing up in Washington State in the 1940s and 50s, I found the stories that spoke to me in the spunky book-loving heroines of 19th century novels. Louisa May Alcott's Jo March, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, and Jane Austen's Lizzie Bennet offered me models of smart, lively young women, even if their major life choice was only whom to marry. These books helped me become the first one in my family to attend college in the 1960s. I was an English major, and the only woman author I was ever assigned to read was Emily Dickinson. After graduation, I was eager for more stories, more education, and now married and working as a high school teacher, I applied to and was accepted into PhD programs at Howard University and the University of Maryland. But when they learned that I was married and pregnant with Kirsten, they let me know that babies and books would not work and encouraged me to apply at a later date, after the birth of the baby. Now, any of you who are mothers know bad advice that was. When we moved from Washington, D.C. to Oakland, I was a mom to 2 kids. I worked as a freelance writer and volunteered, and then Mills happened. And the campus and my mentors, Libby Pope, Russell Sargent, and Jeannie Walker, changed my plans and changed my life. I came to campus in 1970, not for further school, but to take my then 5-year-old Kirsten to a test in the psychology department with Lee Merrill, to place her out of the kindergarten class where she had not been allowed to read and had come home from school I'm digressing, every day in tears. So the school principal called me. Anyway, I'm not supposed to go off on that digression. But while I waited, I picked up an application for the graduate program in English just to satisfy that 1/5 year of college I was missing, which was required to get a secondary credential in California, even though I already taught in Chicago. Anyway, I wanted to teach again. My children were 3 and 5 and volunteered. Oh, that's a transgression. Anyway, let's just say when I first wanted to go back to school for that 5th year, I called the English, this is off script, but I called the English department at Berkeley. And whoever it was that answered the phone said, "Are you married?" And I said, "Yes." They said, "Do you have children?" And I said, "Yes." They said, "Our program would be too demanding for you." So I was feeling discouraged, but I wasn't looking for another program. But when I came to Mills, Jeannie Walker was the person I talked to. And she didn't say, "Are you married? Or do you have children?" She said, "Can you get your application in a week? The deadline is coming." I was accepted, and I loved my courses. In addition to Jeannie Walker's seminars on tragedy and Libby Pope's course on fantasy writers, we read and discussed many of my favorite novels by the Brontes and Alcott and Austen, and they introduced me to more literature by women writers. Novels by writers like George Eliot and Virginia Woolf. And at the end of the year, my professors convinced me to apply for the MA in literature rather than go back to high school teaching. They were so smart. They said, "Ruth, you have 2 young children. You'll have so much more discretionary time if you teach college." So, obviously, I finished the MA, I loved it, and I began teaching writing at the College of Alameda during my final semester of being a student here. I had gone over to investigate whether Anyway, it doesn't matter. I went over to see if I could do some student teaching and figure out whether or not I was good enough to teach college, and they started that interview saying, there's no jobs, and they ended the interview saying, yes, you can do student teaching here, and somebody just quit this morning, so after your lunch break, we'll pay you to teach your class. So I paid Mills tuition to do student teaching, and then I ate lunch, and then I got paid. That was off track, I'm sorry. At the end of my, let's see, I left off a sentence. Then in 1974, I was in Dr. Pope's, I always call her Libby, after I graduated. I was in Libby Pope's office, and she asked if I would consider teaching a writing class at Mills that next semester. So that fall, I was teaching part-time at the College of Alameda, at Cal, and at Mills. But then at the end of the year of teaching, my first year of teaching here, which I loved, these wonderful women called me in and said, "We know, Ruth, your students love you, we love you. You can never be a full-time teacher here unless you get a PhD. Oh, scary. Remember my bad experience at Berkeley? But the laws had changed. So this time, I entered the doctoral program at UC Berkeley with 2 children and full-time teaching. Now, while there were few courses that included women who, those I did expanded the stories that were available to me. In one seminar on American women writers, I read Kate Chopin, Edith Wharton, Flannery O'Connor, Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, Tilly Olsen, Grace Paley, Zora Neale Hurston, and so many others. I read these books, hungry for stories in which I could see myself and the lives of other women. Stories offer us ways to make sense of ourselves and to forge a way of being in our present and to imagine a future. The stories we read, the plot lines we encounter, impact our sense of ourselves and of what might be possible. I searched for myself in stories imagining potential futures through the lenses of fictional lives. I searched for plots that reflected being a daughter, a wife, a mother, a writer, a teacher, and I often found myself torn between Virginia Woolf's characters from her novel To the Lighthouse. On the one hand, the idealized mother, Mrs. Ramsay, and on the other hand, Lily Briscoe, the determinedly unmarried woman artist. They were never allowed to be both in the same plot. But Mills allowed me to see new possibilities. I taught, I wrote, I edited books about women's writing, always searching for fictional possibilities. In my 40s, I noticed that I was the age of all those dead mothers littering my favorite novels by women. The heroines were always the young, marriageable daughter. Their mothers were either dingbats or dead. Then, in my 60s, I noticed once again the unseemly collusion of fictional portrayals with social stereotypes. The ways novels and short stories would caricature the old women, as sort of, I'm exaggerating here, but as either witches or fairy godmothers. These older women characters were still not engaged with the messy currency of living. I kept running into the same old stories in which the older woman was simply beside the point. And at this point, I was focusing a lot on the portrayal of girls in contemporary fiction by women. I published a book on that. But there were old women in those stories, but they were always just brought in, like the grandmother to understand the young girl. And then they disappeared, and we never knew anything about them. Anyway, now where am I? So, as I was saying, the older woman was almost never the one whose story matters. The older woman or grandmother was either absent or important only as she affects the younger heroine. Think, for example, even of fairy tales. Little Red Riding Hood, everybody knows that story. Even in the various contemporary feminist revisions, the grandmother is still food for the wolf and fodder for that generates the story. The story is never about her. So I began a serious search for fictional stories that have old lady protagonists who are not simply marginal. I found old women to be fairly plentiful in detective fiction. And I enjoyed novels in which Miss Marple or Mrs. Halifax or others is able to solve mysteries. Guess why? Because her physical appearance makes her almost invisible. Nobody expects an old lady to be paying attention. But I wanted to read more literary fiction in which I could see through the eyes of an old woman. I searched for stories that got inside the heads of old women. I wanted to gather examples of good aging, of wise or surprising women over 60. I just chose that number apparently because I was in my 60s. Like beads on a string, a secular rosary to help ward off the fear of becoming elderly in a society whose mainstream vision of aging woman is marked by fear, loathing, refusal. I wanted to read stories in which fictional older women become increasingly their best selves. And I first read books praised for their focus on older women. And I saw that she was still mostly a cipher. And when she was central, the novel often fell into a category that I created and called deathbed bookends. The book opens, she's old. She's dying. The book ends, she's older yet or she's dead. Okay? And the whole center of the book is about her youthful romance. And even the New York Times would say, this is a wonderful portrayal of an old woman, and I'd buy the book and I'd be so excited and she's old and she dies. And so, okay, that's enough of that, Ruth. In a cultural climate of advertising that urges us to purchase products or rely on plastic surgery to maintain the appearance of youthful bodies, perhaps it's natural that fictional old women are portrayed at the end of their lives, remembering their youth, rather than looking inward or outward to their present situation. Writers and readers may also have difficulty imagining new adventures for older women because youthful romance is such a familiar plot for women's fiction and movies and TV and so forth. And although youthful romantic memories are rich minds for fiction, so are elder romances. I wanted to find stories about old women's first-hand experience in the present time of life, not ones where they are stuck in the past. Think of all those novels about old men who are not presumed to be simply shades of their once virile younger selves. Exclamation point. Okay, so how could fictional women be so much less interesting than the actual older women I knew? My mother, aunties, and my grandmothers enjoyed new experiences in spite of arthritic hands or swollen ankles. Grandma Halsey welcomed visitors until she died at 102. My mother stayed in touch through handwritten letters with family and friends all over the world. Elderly teachers I knew took up painting or creative writing after retirement. Rousseau Sargent started studying poetry and writing poems and going to writing retreats with Ursula Le Guin. That was off the top. And some of my acquaintances were raising their great-grandchildren. Some of them, like my former professor Diana O'Hare, were even finding new romance. So, by teaching novels to my mostly younger, well, they were all young. No, I had some 60-year-old women. Anyway, by teaching novels to my mostly young Millswood students, in which the old women were always trapped in memories of youthful romance, I realized I was unintentionally colluding in a distortion of actual women's possibilities. So I began research in nonfiction, including psychological and sociological texts, biographies, autobiographies, memoirs and journals, newspaper articles, all of which shored up my own sense that actual old women have infinitely more plots than I found in fiction. So what was going wrong? Why were our stories not being written, published, taught? The lack of good fictional role models for aging women appears to be wrapped up in a larger problem of how we all think about old age. I wonder to what extent the difficulty for writers to imagine life in the present through the eyes of an old woman mirrors the same difficulty in modern life, where independence, speed, productivity are highly valued. And culture fails to imagine any of the benefits of a newly acquired dependence or interdependence, slowing down, or wisdom as possible gifts. I looked for stories of older women in which they notice not only their desire, but their strength, the beauty they appreciate through their sight and hearing, life-giving breath that sustains them. The Book of Old Ladies seeks out existing, strong characters and vital plots and critiques, I'll admit it, the stereotypes that still abound. I appreciate stories in which old ladies not only survive the huge losses of their lives, such as divorce, death of a partner, serious illness, forced retirement, alienation from adult children, the list is very long, but discover undeveloped parts of themselves, occasionally defy limiting conventions and habits that no longer serve them well. Stories of satisfying lives after loss lift my spirits and affirm what I have observed not only personally, but also in life writing, in journals, diaries, biographies, and memoirs. When I lost my brain, as I had known it, in a traumatic brain injury, in a car accident in my early 60s, I was for a while unable to read, let alone to write. And I will go off just a tiny bit here. I would be cooking and I would go out to pick herbs and I would forget I was cooking and I would start weeding the garden. Let's not think about what was happening on the stove. I hungered for stories of development And I hoped to counter the dismal medical advice, which was quit your job, except that you probably won't ever read or write again. Now, I'm not given to denial, but I have a very strong streak of defiance when faced with dire predictions. So rather than give up, I spent years of hard work. Physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, vision therapy, psychotherapy, acupuncture, Pilates, while impersonating my former self at home and at Mills. And when my reading improved from what was tested as second grade level, now realize I had a PhD, okay? Second grade level reading, and we had jokes in the family that you could just give mom one book because by the time she got to the second page, she couldn't remember what was on the first page. I was able to return to my original project, Old Women, protagonists in fiction, knowing firsthand the importance of hope and invention after loss. I am committed to I am not committed, what do I say? Oh, I am committed not to regaining a lost whole self, but to embracing the possibilities of new modes of knowing that the self I am in is okay. I had teaching assistants. I learned how to teach differently. Life went on. Right now, I'm losing my eyesight to macular degeneration. And, of course, I feel sorry for myself. Who wouldn't? But I'm learning to listen to books on tape. There's some very good narrators out there, although I always thought poorly of that. And I'm finding new ways to continue to access stories. My book echoes my belief that stories help us imagine new plots for our own lives. And while not all stories progress easily or end well, however we define that term, the simplistic erasure of the experience of the older woman as diminished or not of interest is frankly a lack of imagination. My book introduces readers to a small selection of older women who, as Fran, that's a character in Margaret Drabble's book, The Dark Flood Rises, are, quote, already too old to die young. All of them have lost someone or something, yet most of them discover new ways of living out the rest of their lives with joy. They are not role models, but nearly all of them are honest about who they are and what they need. They take action to bring about change in their present lives rather than obsessing about their youth. Their actions range from subtle acceptance to burning down the house, from disregarding the limited plans of their adult children, to traipsing across Canada with a talking hyena. These are like the characters, okay? They are fully rounded characters, not lurking around the edges, but taking up the center of their stories, and we get caught up in their adventures. And they are neither wicked witches nor fairy godmothers. Thank you so much.